The cantina on Kepler's Rest was filled with smoke and the low hum of alien voices. Commander Vection sat in the corner booth, his 6 arms wrapped around a glass of blue liquid. 3 young Zalari soldiers sat across from him, their large eyes wide, with curiosity. "You really fought with humans during the war?" asked Creto, the youngest of the group. His voice carried doubt and fear. Vection took a long drink and set his glass down slowly. His weathered face showed the scars of many battles. "I did more than fight with them. Young one, I learned to fear them." The 3 soldiers exchanged glances. Humans were small compared to most galactic species. They had no natural weapons, no thick armor plating, no poisonous claws. What could be scary about them? "Let me tell you about Proxima 7. Vexen said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It was early in the war. The Kralians had us trapped underground in the old mining tunnels, 50 of my best warriors and about 30 humans from their medical corps." He paused and stared into his drink. The memory was still fresh. After all these years, the human medic was a small man named Danny Murphy. Quiet fellow, always polite. He spent his days treating wounded soldiers, both human and Zelthari. Never complained, never raised. His voice, he had gentle hands and kind eyes. I thought he was weak. Creto leaned forward. "What happened to him?" "The Kralians found our position on the 3rd day. They came down the main tunnel with everything they had, plasma rifles, shock. Troops wore drones. We fought hard, but they kept coming. My warriors were falling back and the wounded were in the medical bay behind us." BX Han's voice grew darker. "I saw Murphy working on a young human soldier who had taken a plasma blast to the chest. The boy was dying, calling for his mother. Murphy was trying to save him when the Kralians broke through our front line." The old commander took another drink. His hands were shaking slightly. A Kralian shock trooper charged into the medical bay. Big, ugly thing with razor claws and acid spit. It was heading straight for the wounded. Murphy looked up from the dying soldier and saw it. "Coming, did he run?" asked another young soldier. "Run?" Vexan laughed, but there was no humor in that little human. Stood up and stepped between the Kralian and his patients. No weapon, no armor, just his medical kit and his bare hands. The cantina seemed to grow quieter as Vexan continued his story. The Kralon was twice Murphy's size. It roared and raised its claws. To strike, I thought I was about to watch a good man die, but then something changed in Murphy's eyes. They went cold, dead cold, like looking into empty space. Vex's hands shuddered at the memory. Murphy moved faster than I had ever seen a human move. He grabbed a surgical laser from his kit and cut the Kralian's throat in one smooth motion. The creature dropped, gurgling and bleeding, but Murphy wasn't done. The 3 young soldiers sat in complete silence. More Kralians poured. Into the medical bay, Murphy picked up the dead trooper's plasma rifle and started shooting, but he wasn't just firing wildly. Every shot found its target. Every movement had purpose. He fought like a machine built for killing. Vexan paused and looked at each of the young soldiers, but here's the part that still gives me nightmares. While he was fighting, he was still treating patients. He would shoot 3 Kralians, then turn and apply pressure to a wound, kill 2 more, then inject someone with painkillers he was fighting and healing at the same time. "That's impossible," whispered Creto. "I saw it with my own eyes." Murphy cleared that medical bay of 15 Kralian soldiers in less than 5 minutes. When it was over, he stood there covered in enemy blood, breathing hard. The wounded soldiers looked at him like he was some kind of god of war. BXan finished his drink and signaled for another. But then the strangest thing happened. A wounded crayon crawled out from under a pile of bodies. It was badly hurt. No threat to anyone, Murphy saw. It, and his eyes changed back. The coldness was gone. He knelt down next to the enemy soldier and started treating its wounds. The young soldiers stared in confusion, asked him why he was helping the creature that had tried to kill us all. Murphy looked up at me with those gentle eyes and said, "It's not fighting anymore now, it's just hurt." He saved that Kralian's life. Vection accepted his new drink from a passing server. The battle wasn't over. We still had Kralians in the outer tunnels. Murphy handed the plasma rifle to one of my warriors and went back to his medical work. Just like that, he switched from killer to healer again. "What happened next?" asked one of the soldiers. "We held the tunnels for 2 more days. Every time the enemy broke through, Murphy would change, the gentle medic would disappear, and something else would take his place, something that knew exactly how to kill efficiently and without mercy. Then when the fighting stopped, he would go back to saving lives." Vexhan took a long drink and continued on. "The last day reinforcements finally arrived. The Kralians retreated, and we were rescued as we were leaving the tunnels. I walked beside Murphy. He was helping a wounded Zelthari soldier who had lost a leg. The old commander's voice grew quiet. I asked him how he could switch back and forth like that, how he could be so gentle one moment and so deadly the next. Murphy thought for a long time before answering. "What did he say?" Credo asked. He said, "Commander, I became a medic because I want to save lives, but sometimes to save the lives that matter, you have to take the lives that threaten them. It's not something I enjoy, it's just something I do." When I have Tovek's hand stared into his drink again, that's when I realized what makes humans so terrifying in war. It's not their weapons or their tactics, it's their ability to become exactly what the situation requires. They can be healers, killers, teachers, destroyers, whatever the moment demands. He looked up at the 3 young soldiers. Murphy saved 47 lives in those tunnels, 32 humans, 14 Zelthari and Doan Kralian. But he also killed 23 enemy soldiers with his bare hands and captured weapons. Same man, same heart, same conscience. He just chose what he needed to be. The cantina had grown much quieter. Other patrons had stopped their conversations to listen to the old commander's story after the war. I looked up Murphy. He went back to Earth and became a doctor in a children's hospital, spent his days making sick kids laugh and helping them get better. The same hands that had killed so efficiently were now healing. The smallest and most innocent Vexhan finished his second drink and stood up slowly. "That's why I fear humans, young ones, not because they're monsters, but because they can choose to be monsters when they need to be, and then they can choose to stop being monsters just as easily. That kind of control, that kind of purpose is more dangerous than any weapon." The 3 soldiers sat in stunned silence as Vexhan prepared to leave. "Remember this story: when you meet humans in battle, they might seem small and weak, but inside, every one of them is a Danny Murphy waiting to come out. Pray you never see it happen with that." The old commander walked away, leaving the young soldiers to contemplate the terrifying nature of humanity's greatest weapon, their ability to choose who they needed to be. The next evening, the 3 young Zelthari soldiers returned to the cantina. They had spent all day thinking about Commander Vexhan's story about the human medic. The image of Danny Murphy, switching from healer to killer, haunted their dreams. Vexhan was already sitting in his usual corner booth when they arrived. He had been expecting them. "You came back," he said without looking up from his drink. "We need to hear more," said Cato, "about the humans, about what they're really like in war." The old commander nodded, slowly. "Very well. But tonight's story is different tonight. I'll tell you about Captain Lisa Hayes and what happened in the Vega asteroid belt." He gestured for them to sit down. The cantina was busier. Tonight filled with traders and spacers from across the galaxy, but Vexhan's voice carried clearly to his small audience. This was 6 months into the war. The Kralians had taken control of most of the Vega system. They had a massive supply fleet moving through the asteroid, belt bringing weapons and food to their frontline forces. Vexhan paused to take a drink. The human destroyer called the Eagle's Wing was sent to disrupt those supply lines. Captain Hayes commanded a crew of 250 good ship-experienced crew modern weapons, but the Kryans were ready for them. The 3 soldiers leaned forward, eager to hear what happened next. The enemy hit the Eagle's Wing with everything they had: plasma cannons, missile swarms, boarding parties. The human ship fought hard, but it was outnumbered, 20-1. We watched from our position and saw the Eagle's Wing take fatal damage. Main engines destroyed, hull breached in 12 places, most of the crew dead or wounded. "Did it explode?" asked one of the young soldiers. "That's what we all thought the ship disappeared into the asteroid field, leaking air and fuel, no distress signals, no communications. The Kralians declared it destroyed and went back to their supply runs, marked Captain Hayes and her crew as casualties of war. Vexhand's eyes grew distant. As he remembered, but the Eagle's wing hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed into something much worse. He took another drink before continuing. 3 weeks later, a Kralian supply convoy disappeared near the outer edge of the asteroid belt. No distress. Calls, no wreckage found. The enemy assumed it was pirates or maybe a navigation error. Space is dangerous. The cantina noise seemed to fade as other patrons began listening to the story. Then another convoy vanished. This time, there were survivors. They told a strange story about a ghost ship that appeared out of nowhere, attacked them, and disappeared again. The Kryans didn't believe it at first. What kind of ghost ship? Katato asked. The Eagle's wing. Captain Hayes had kept her ship alive with nothing but spare parts and determination. She had only 12 crew members left, but fallen warriors' final messages to loved ones, death screams from previous battles. The living would hear their dead friends calling to them from empty space. The 3 young soldiers shivered despite the warm cantina air. Hayes targeted specific enemy commanders based on their psychological profiles. She learned who they had lost, who they missed most. Then she would make them hear those voices in the darkness of space. Vexhand's voice grew darker. Commander Thrakon heard his dead son calling for help. Captain Veshai found recordings of her fallen mate playing in her quarters. Major Kitos discovered his brother's final battle, report echoing through his ship's corridors over and over. How did she get inside their ships? Kitu asked. The Eagle's wing was badly damaged, but Hayes was a clever engineer. She used the ship's broken hull sections as stealth pods. Her crew would drift through space like debris, then attach to enemy vessels and sneak aboard. The old commander continued his tale for 3 months. Hayes turned the asteroid belt into a haunted graveyard. Cranian supply ships would find their dead crew members arranged in ceremonial positions. Living soldiers would discover holographic recordings of their own deaths playing in empty rooms. Their own deaths. Asked a soldier, Hayes had her computer create false recordings showing how each enemy soldier would die. She would leave these playing in places where they would be found. The psychological effect was devastating. Vexhand looked around. The quiet cantina. The Kryans began to believe they were being hunted by an army of vengeful spirits. Their morale collapsed. Entire convoys would surrender without a fight rather than face the ghost ship. What happened to Captain Hayes? Creto asked. The way enemy sent a battle group of 50 ships to destroy her 50 ships against one half-dead destroyer with 12 crew members, it should have been a massacre. Vexhand finished his drink instead. The entire Kryan battle group surrendered. Hayes had spent weeks preparing for them. She knew exactly which dead warriors each commander had served with. She knew their deepest fears and biggest regrets. The cantina was now completely silent, except for Vexhand's voice when the battle group arrived. They found the Eagle's wing waiting for them, not hiding, not running, just floating there like a corpse in space. Then the voices started. What voices? Whispered a soldier. Every dead Kralian from the past 6 months of war, all speaking at once, calling the names of the living, demanding to know why they had been abandoned. Hayes had recorded thousands of voices and mixed them into a chorus of the dead. Vexhand gestured for another drink. The Nimi fleet commander tried to order an attack, but his crew refused. They believed they were surrounded by angry spirits, one by one. The 50 ships powered down their weapons and requested permission to surrender to a single damaged ship. Creto asked in amazement to the most terrifying weapon in space. Vexhand corrected. Fear. Hayes had turned the enemy's own beliefs against them. She made them defeat themselves. The bartender brought Vexhand his drink with shaking hands when our rescue fleet finally found the Eagle's wing. Hayes was still alive. Her ship was held together with emergency patches and prayer, but she had destroyed an entire enemy supply network without firing a single shot. In anger, "What happened to her after the war?" asked a soldier. "She went back to Earth and became a teacher, children's literature, I believe." The same mind that created psychological warfare now helps young humans learn to read. Vekshan stood up slowly. That's the second lesson about humans in war. They don't just fight with weapons. They fight with understanding. They learn how you think, how you feel, what you fear. Then they use that knowledge to make you defeat yourself. He looked at each of the young soldiers. Captain, Hayes won a battle against 50 enemy ships using nothing but fear and imagination. Remember that when you wonder why the galaxy respects human warriors. They don't just fight you. They get inside your head and make you fight yourself with that. The old commander walked away, leaving his audience to contemplate the terrifying power of human psychology turned toward war. 3 days had passed since Commander Vekshan told the story of the ghost ship. The young Zalari soldiers had barely slept. Every time they closed their eyes, they imagined Captain Hayes broadcasting the voices of the dead through empty space. Tonight they returned to the cantina earlier than usual. They found Vekshan already waiting, but he looked different, older, somehow more tired. His 6 arms rested heavily on the table. "Commander," said Kreto carefully, "are you well? Tonight's story is harder to tell." Vekshan replied without looking up. "It's about sacrifice, about what humans will do when they know they're going to die." The 3 soldiers sat down quietly around them. The cantina buzzed with normal activity, but their corner felt separate from the rest of the world. "Tell us about Zerion Prime," said one. Of the soldiers, he had heard other veterans whisper that name with respect and fear. Vekshan nodded slowly. "Colonel Jake Peterson, a human from Mars who understood war better than any general I ever met. He commanded Forward Observation Post 7 on Zerion Prime." The old commander finally looked up at his audience. The post wasn't much to look at, just a concrete bunker built into a hilltop with communication equipment and sensor arrays. Peterson had 47 soldiers under his command. Their job was to watch for enemy movements and report back to headquarters. "Sounds like easy duty," said Kato. "It was until the Kralians decided to invade Zerion Prime with everything they had: 300,000 troops, air support, heavy artillery. The biggest invasion force we had seen in the war." Vekshan paused to order his usual drink. "High Command ordered all forward posts to evacuate immediately. The civilian population was already fleeing to the transport ships. No point in losing good soldiers to hold worthless positions." "But Peterson didn't evacuate?" asked a soldier. "No, he sent a message back to headquarters, saying his post would remain operational as long as possible. He wanted to provide intelligence on enemy movements to help the evacuation." The bartender brought Vekshan his drink, but the commander didn't touch it. Command told Peterson he had 6 hours before the enemy reached his position. After that, he and his soldiers would be on their own. No rescue, no reinforcements, no hope. "What did he do?" Kreto whispered. "He gathered his 47 soldiers and explained the situation. They could leave with the evacuation ships or stay and fight a hopeless battle." Every single one of them chose to stay. Vekshan finally took a sip of his drink. "I was part of the relief force that was supposed to arrive after the evacuation was complete. We expected to find Zerion Prime under full enemy control. Instead, we received a transmission from Peterson's post." "He was still alive?" asked a soldier in amazement. "Not just alive, still fighting. It had been 3 days since the Kralian invasion began." Peterson's voice came through the radio as calm as if he was ordering breakfast. He gave us detailed reports on enemy positions, troop movements, and weak points in their lines. The 3 young soldiers stared in disbelief. "How is that possible?" Kato asked. Peterson had studied every famous last stand in human military history: the Battle of Thermop, the Alamo Roar's Drift, the Battle of Cameron. He knew exactly how small forces could hold against impossible odds. Vekshan's voice grew stronger as he continued the story. "The first thing Peterson did was turn his observation post into a fortress. His soldiers worked for hours, moving equipment, creating firing positions, and setting up kill zones. But that wasn't the clever part, what was asked. A soldier Peterson understood that. The post itself wasn't important. What mattered was making the enemy believed it was important. He started broadcasting fake intelligence reports about secret weapons hidden in the bunker. The cantina had begun to quiet down as other patrons listened. To the story Peterson made, the Kralians think the observation post was actually a command center for some kind of superweapon. He sent false transmissions about experimental technology and classified research. Did the enemy believe it, Credo asked. They sent 10,000 troops to capture what they thought was a strategic target. 10,000 soldiers against 47 humans on a hilltop. Vekshan took another drink. The attack began at dawn on the second day. The Kralians came up the hill in waves, expecting to overwhelm the small garrison quickly. Instead, they ran into the most perfectly designed killing field I have ever seen. "What do you mean?" asked a soldier. Peterson had studied the terrain for months. He knew exactly where the enemy would attack, from where they would take cover, how they would advance. His soldiers had prepared for every possibility. The old commander's eyes grew distant. The humans had pre-sighted their weapons to cover every approach. They had calculated firing angles, set up crossfire zones, and prepared fallback positions when the Kralians attacked. They walked into a maze of death. How many enemy soldiers did they kill? Cred whispered over 2,000 in the first attack alone. The Kralians had never seen anything like it. 47 humans were fighting like they had supernatural knowledge of. The battlefield. Vekshan paused to let that number sink in. But Peterson wasn't finished. During the brief pause between attacks, he got on the radio and started giving tactical advice to other human units fighting across the planet. He was sharing what he had learned about enemy tactics and weaknesses while under attack himself. Asked a soldier in amazement, Peterson treated the siege like a laboratory experiment he was studying. Kralian assault methods and passing that information to other commanders. His own death was just part of the research. The cantina had grown very quiet now. The second attack came with air support. Kralian fighters strafed the hilltop while ground troops advanced from 3 directions. Peterson's soldiers shot down 4 aircraft and held their positions. How many humans were left? Credo asked. 35. They had lost 12 soldiers in the first day of fighting, but Peterson kept broadcasting intelligence reports like nothing had happened. Bxon finished his drink and signaled for another. The third attack was the largest. The Kralians brought artillery, heavy weapons, even some of their elite shock troops. They pounded the hilltop for 2 hours before sending in ground forces. Did the humans break? Asked a soldier. They never even wavered. Peterson had prepared his soldiers for this moment. They knew they were going to die, but they also knew their deaths would save thousands of civilian lives. The bartender brought Vekshan his new drink with obvious respect. The Kralians took the outer defenses after 6 hours of fighting. Peterson's last transmission was a detailed analysis of enemy tactics and recommendations for future battles. No request for help, no dramatic last words, just professional military intelligence. What happened? To Peterson to ask quietly. When our relief force finally reached Xerian Prime, we found the observation post still held by 7 living humans. Peterson was one of them, wounded but still coordinating defensive fire from a makeshift command post. In the bunker, the 3 soldiers sat in stunned silence. 7 survivors from 47. Asked one finally see 7 humans who'd held a hilltop against an entire army for 3 days. They had killed over 8,000 Kralian soldiers and provided intelligence that saved the entire civilian evacuation. Vekshan looked at each of the young soldiers. But here's what still amazes me about that battle. When we rescued Peterson, the first thing he did was ask about casualty reports from other units. He wanted to know how effective his tactical recommendations had been even after everything he had been through. Credo asked Peterson saw his own survival as less important than the success of the overall mission. He'd spent 3 days watching his soldiers die one by one, but he never stopped thinking about the bigger picture. The old commander stood up slowly. That's the third lesson about humans in war. They can accept certain death and still fight with perfect tactical discipline. They turn hopeless battles into strategic victories through sheer force of will. He looked around the quiet cantina. Peterson went back to Mars after the war, and became a teacher at their military academy. He trains young human officers in the art of tactical thinking. The same mind that held a hilltop against impossible odds now shapes the next generation of human warriors. BX prepared to leave. Remember, Peterson, when you think humans are just another species, they can face certain death with the same calm they used. To plan a training exercise, that kind of mental discipline is what makes them so dangerous in war. With that, the old commander walked away, leaving the young soldiers to contemplate the terrifying courage of humanity's finest warriors. A week had passed. Since Commander Vekshan told the story of Peterson's last stand, the three young Zelthari soldiers had requested leave from their duties to think about what they had heard. Their superior officers understood learning about error. Human warfare was considered essential education for any soldier who might fight alongside them. Tonight the cantina felt different when they arrived, quieter. More serious word had spread about Vexahan's stories, and other veterans had come to listen. But the old commander still sat in his usual corner booth, waiting for his regular audience. "Commander," said Credo as they sat down, "the other soldiers in our unit don't believe your stories. They say humans can't be that different from other species." Vekshan smiled sadly. "They'll learn, young one. If they're lucky, they'll learn without having to fight against humans. Tonight I'll tell you about Lieutenant Commander Rachel Stone." The three soldiers noticed that Vekshan had ordered a stronger drink. Tonight his hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass. Stone was different from the other humans I've told you about. She never fired a weapon. In anger, never commanded troops in battle. But she won more victories for the human cause than any general. "How?" asked one of the soldiers. "She was an interrogator, the best in the entire Galactic Alliance. When we captured high-ranking enemy officers, they were brought to Stone for questioning." Vekshan took a long drink before continuing. "Now you might think interrogation is about force, about breaking someone's will through pain or fear. Most species use those methods, but humans, especially Stone, understood something deeper about the mind." The cantina grew quiet as other patrons leaned in to listen. "I first met Stone on the prison ship, Mercy's Hand. We had just captured a Kralian general named Vrathul. This was a big prize. Vrathul knew the locations of enemy supply bases, troop movements, even invasion plans." "Did he talk?" asked Credo. Not at first. Vrathul had been trained to resist interrogation. He expected torture threats, maybe drugs. Instead, Stone did something no one expected. Vekshan paused dramatically. Cher searched him for 3 days. Stone studied everything about Vrathul's life. His family, his home planet, his military career, his hobbies, even his favorite foods. She learned more about him than his own wife knew. "Why?" asked a soldier. "Because Stone understood that every person, no matter how strong, has things they care about, things that make them vulnerable, but not in the way you might think." The old commander ordered another drink on the 4th day. Stone finally met with Vrathul. He was expecting a small interrogation room with bright lights and hard chairs. Instead, she brought him to a comfortable lounge with soft furniture and warm lighting. "She made him comfortable?" Credo asked in confusion. "More than comfortable." She had replicated the exact smell of his home planet's flowers. The walls showed holographic images of his homeworld's 3 moons. She had even prepared traditional Kralian tea using his grandmother's recipe. The 3 soldiers looked at each other in bewilderment. Stone greeted Vrathul in perfect Kralian, including the formal dialect used by military officers. Sheikh knew about his son's graduation from the academy, his daughter's upcoming wedding, his wife's work as a teacher. How did she know? All that asked. A soldier human intelligence networks are very thorough, but Stone didn't use this information to threaten or blackmail. Instead, she used it to become someone Vrathul could trust. Vekshan's voice grew softer. Stone spent the first meeting just talking with the general about his family. She showed genuine interest in his children's accomplishments. She asked about Kranian poetry, which was one of his hobbies. She even knew the names of his favorite authors. But did she get any military information? Credo asked. Not that day or the next day or the day after that for a full week. Stone just talked with Ricali like they were old friends. She learned about his fears for his family's safety during the war, his worry about young soldiers. Under his command, his hope that the conflict would end soon. The cantina had grown very quiet. Now by the end of the first week, Vrathel looked forward to his meetings with Stone. She was the only person who listened to him without judgment, who understood his concerns, who treated him like a person instead of a prisoner. "When did she start asking for military secrets?" asked a soldier. "She never did. That's what made Stone so effective. She never asked direct questions about troop positions or battle plans. Instead, she let Vrath talk about whatever worried him. Vection took another drink. Vrathel began sharing his concerns about the war, how his supply lines were stretched too thin, how his soldiers were getting sick from poor food, how the younger officers didn't understand proper tactics. He was giving away military intelligence without realizing it. Credo asked more than that. Stone made him want to share these problems because she convinced him she cared about finding solutions. Fractal began to see Stone as someone who might help him protect his soldiers. The old commander's voice grew darker. After 2 weeks, Fractal was telling Stone everything, not because he was broken or forced, but because he believed she was his friend. He thought she understood him better than his own commanders. "That's impossible," said one of the soldiers. "I watched it happen." Stone would spend hours listening to Vrathal's stories about his childhood, his military training, his family traditions. She remembered every detail and asked thoughtful questions. She made him feel valued and understood. Vection stared into his drink. The strangest part was that Stone's concern was real. She genuinely cared about Vrath's well-being. She made sure he ate proper meals, got enough sleep, had books to read in his own language. She worried about his health and asked about his family. "How could she care about an enemy general?" asked Credo. "That's what made Stone so terrifying. She could genuinely like someone while simultaneously destroying them." Her empathy was real, but she used it as a weapon. The cantina fell silent except for Vection's voice after a month. Fractal had revealed the locations of 12 supply bases, troop strength for 6 battle groups, and the complete invasion timeline for the Centauri sector, all because he trusted Stone completely. What happened when he